Welcome along to Complete Aviation Solutions, deep dive number 73. Today we're going to dive in some really interesting recent shifts in the aviation world. We're looking specifically at how airlines are growing their fleets, expanding their reach, and, well, forging new connections. Our aim, as always, is to sort of unpack these developments for you, figure out what's really going on and, why it matters.
Absolutely. And we've got three main things on the radar today. First up, there's a Mongolian airline, Hunnu Air, bringing in some next-gen aircraft, quite exciting. Then we'll shift focus to Canada, where WestJet is seeing some pretty significant investment from big international names. And finally, we'll look at sustainable aviation fuel, or SF, and what a major Asian airline group is doing there.
Okay, great. Let's start with Hunnu Air then, in Mongolia. So they've started flying brand new Embraer E195 E2s, and the first scheduled flight was Ulaanbaatar to Beijing's Daxing Airport. What's the big deal about this specific flight?
Well, it's interesting because it wasn't just, another flight launch. They actually held a ceremony, had people from the airline, from Embraer, the manufacturer, and the airport itself. It really underscores the importance they're placing on this link between Mongolia and China. It points to a real push for boat connectivity, maybe boosting trade, and cultural ties, too.
Right, and these E2 aircrafts,
Right.
they're the newer version of Embraer's E-jets, yeah. What's better about them?
Exactly. The E2 means they're upgraded, more fuel-efficient engines, updated cabin tech, stuff like that. Makes them a really solid choice for airlines looking to, well, modernize and cut down on running costs. Hunnu Air got two of these back in April, and it sounds like they've got bigger plans than just this Beijing route.
Yeah, it seems so. Reports mention they want to boost capacity on routes they already fly, places like Haiku, Sanya, Fuquoc. But they're looking even further out, aren't they?
Oh, definitely. They're talking about expanding into Japan, more cities in China, Vietnam, India, South Korea, and they're even planning scheduled flights to Tashkent. That suggests a pretty ambitious growth plan across key Asian markets.
And inside the plane, for passengers, these E195 E2s sound pretty good. Dual class, 136 seats, and a 2x2 layout. No middle seats, that's always a win. What does that layout tell us?
It signals they're really thinking about the passenger experience as they grow. Prioritizing comfort like that. It's
No.
likely a way to attract people in these competitive markets. The airline CEO even said it shows their commitment to expanding internationally and reflects that growing link between Mongolia and China.
Interesting. And Hunnu Air, they've used the older E190s since 2019, right? So they know Embraer planes. Does that previous experience play into this upgrade?
I'd say almost certainly. Being familiar with the platform probably makes everything smoother. Maintenance, pilot training, operations generally. It's a logical step, really. Use what you know, but get the benefits of the newer tech to handle more travelers. Embraer also made a point of saying how significant this first E2 flight into mainland China is. They seem committed to supporting Hunnu Air's growth and, well, the potential they see in Mongolia's aviation scene.
And Embraer has been involved in Mongolia since 2018, apparently, so it's not a brand new relationship. Plus, the E-Jets program itself is huge globally.
It really is. Over 1,800 delivered, flying with more than 80 airlines in 12 countries. It's a proven platform. That track record likely gives Hunnu Air a lot of confidence as they, push forward with this expansion.
Okay, let's switch gears now and head over to North America. Looks like Korean Air and Delta Airlines are putting some serious money into WestJet, the Canadian airline. What's the story there?
Yeah, this is quite significant. Delta's putting in US $330 million for a 15% stake, and Korean Air is investing US $220 million. That gets them 10%. So together, that's 25% of WestJet. And there's another little twist. Delta plans to sell a small part of its stake, about 2.3%, to Air France-KLM, their joint venture partner.
Okay, so minority stakes, yes, but that feels like more than just a standard code share agreement. Though the original owner, Onex, keeps control, right? What does that kind of investment structure usually mean?
Typically, yeah, it signals a much tighter strategic alignment. The investors get closer ties, maybe more say in things, which can lead to better collaboration on routes, service, the whole customer experience. But like you said, Onex stays in charge of the overall direction, and this definitely builds on the code shares that Korean Air and Delta already had with WestJet. What they're all emphasizing is better benefits for travelers, a more seamless experience globally is the promise.
Right, seamless travel. The CEOs from both Korean Air and Delta talked about boosting connectivity. Korean Air focusing on the Trans-Pacific, Delta talking about a world-class global network. What does that actually mean for you, the passenger?
Well, ideally, it means things like easier connections, maybe more integrated frequent flyer programs eventually, just a smoother journey overall when you're flying across these different airline networks. Those existing code shares will probably get beefed up, giving you better access between, say, Seoul and Canadian hubs like Vancouver, Toronto, Calgary, and then onwards within Canada, the US, or Asia.
It's notable that Delta's been flying to Canada for a very long time, over 90 years apparently. And they've done these kinds of minority stake investments elsewhere too. Is this part of a bigger picture for Delta?
It certainly looks that way. This pattern of strategic equity stakes suggests Delta has a clear strategy. They're building this strong global network not just on their own metal, but by closely aligning with key partners in different parts of the world. It creates a much more interconnected web.
Okay, finally, let's talk about sustainability. Huge topic in aviation. The Singapore Airlines Group, SIA, has announced some deals related to sustainable aviation fuel, SF. What have they actually done?
Right, they've made deals with two suppliers, Nest and World Energy. From Nesta, they bought 1,000 tons of pure, unblended SF. It's actually produced right there in Singapore, gets blended locally, and used out of Changi Airport. It's their second time doing this, and it helps build up Singapore's own SF capabilities. Then, from World Energy, which is US-based, they bought about 2,000 tons of F, but in a slightly different way, as emissions reductions using something called the book and claim model.
Book and claim. Okay, that sounds interesting. How does that work for cutting emissions if the fuel isn't directly in their planes?
It's a system that lets an airline buy the environmental credit, basically, the CO2 reduction benefit, from SAF that's being used somewhere else. So even if the physical fuel isn't uplifted by SIA's planes at that moment, they're paying for and claiming the emissions cut associated with S used elsewhere in the system.
Yeah.
Between these two deals, they reckon it'll cut CO2 emissions by over 9,500 tons.
And Singapore Airlines is involved in a wider campaign too, trying to boost SAF demand in the Asia Pacific. Sounds like they're pretty serious about this.
They definitely seem to be. Their chief sustainability officer called these deals important steps for scaling up SAF use and just learning more about the whole S market. They have a target, 5% SAF use by 2030, and the bigger goal is net zero carbon emissions by 2050. They describe the approach as test and learn. So, trying things out, expanding supply, using their buying power to drive the industry, pushing for helpful policies, raising awareness, and working on standard ways to account for SAF. It's quite comprehensive.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together then. What are the main things for you listening to take away from all this? We've got airlines in Asia like Hunnu Air modernizing their fleets, opening up new routes, focusing on passenger comfort. We see major global players like Delta and Korean Air deepening ties through investments in airlines like WestJet, aiming for that seamless travel experience. And at the same time, there are these really concrete steps being taken towards making flying more sustainable, like with SIA and TAF.
Exactly. It paints a picture of a really dynamic industry right now. Airlines are positioning themselves strategically for what's next. That means expanding where they fly, making the journey better for passengers, but also increasingly tackling that big challenge of environmental impact.
Which really leaves us with a final thought for you to consider. As these trends for your planes, the closer partnerships, the push for sustainable fuel, as they all continue to play out, how do you think they'll ultimately shape your own experiences when you travel by air in the coming years? Definitely something to think about next time you're planning a trip.